Over the past several years, some of the most exciting vehicles I've done videos on have been supplied to me through Tri Industries, a local non-for-profit organization whose mission it is to employ people with severe disabilities and disabled veterans. And when they started this, they were trying to come up with creative ways to fundraise. So they bought cars, because they're car people, in hopes to kind of raffle them off. They contacted me and asked me if I wanted to do videos. And ever since I've started doing this, not only do I have the freedom to be more creative, but they've grown their business. They got new accounts. Now they have more employees, thanks to a lot of the viewership here. And again, this 911T, if you'd like to win it, there's a code below to get more tickets for your dollar or to see their other auctions in the future. And I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video and supporting all of this. Inside the 911T, Porsche has a history of simplicity, and this generation is an example of that. You have not completely seen the removal of analog gauges. You have an analog clock that is more like a precision time instrument. Your gauge cluster. What are all these needles? I can't read this unless I have 20 screens in here, which this does not have. And that is something that I think a lot of the crowd that wants a more pure car, a more throwback car, is going to enjoy this in so many ways. Now, I got an email from Peter, a member of PCA. And he reminded me about 20 times in this email that he's a doctor, and he wants a 911 with a custom license plate that says CardioMD1. And he said, is this car going to make things happen for me? And I don't really know what that means, but I can tell you, Peter, that this is one of the most comfortable sports cars you're ever gonna find. It's not going to be the most quiet luxury car experience, but you almost forget that you're in here. Ergonomically, in terms of like little storage nooks and crannies, like the door pockets open up for storage, which a lot of cars don't think. The cup holders are completely functional, and it's strangely hidden in the dash, but there's this mechanical feel to everything in this car. You can tell that the evolution of the 911, they've continued to improve it. And I think it doesn't matter whether you're somebody that's type A or you're type F or type S or type R, you're gonna find something in here to really appreciate. Let's just get on, you f***ing just f*** it. There's a few other things to note, and the interior space is a combination of basically everything that the enthusiast likes, like the fabric grab handles for the doors instead of traditional plastic. They've combined a lot of the elements that they've taken from the GT3. You have cloth bucket seats, and people are like, well, how could you pay $100,000 and have cloth seats? Well, there's a huge benefit to this in terms of grip, breathability, and there's just more attention to detail in this car that makes it feel like it's more purposeful. And that's what Porsche does a really good job with. Now, of course, if you want to add other things, that's when the price gets ridiculous, but this is a more back to basics 911 for the common man. I'm gonna roll up this window here since Johnny Diesel decided to pull up and talk about some of the things that I don't particularly like and I haven't gotten over since I've been in this car. And that is, there's a plethora of physical controls, which is a huge pro in the world of getting rid of all that. And Porsche has an internal directive to kind of declutter their interiors and go to all the screens like everybody else. So I don't want to complain that it's here because I know it's going away, but it's just a cluttered space. You have 4 stalks on the steering wheel. You have all these buttons that are way too tiny to really kind of utilize, especially in the dark or while you're driving. But I do like the way they laid out some of the driving controls, like the wing or spoiler up and down, your shock or damper settings, your traction control. That's good. And I think once you get used to it, you're going to love this. And again, I know it's going away. I just wish they would have found some balance in all of that design. The drive mode selector is on the steering wheel, which is great. And once you understand what all of it is, it's a lot more intuitive. All right, that's enough of the quiet. Last thing, usability. It's got a frunk, and you can fit a lot in there. The rear half of the car, it just has this little flap that you can pop up to refill the fluid and your oil. The back seats, they're there, and there's child seat anchors back there, which is unbelievable to me. So what this means is you can replace your SUV with this car, obviously, or you can fit somebody in the back that you literally despise. So you have the functionality of this car. It still rides great. It still feels good, but that's enough of that. Let's get in the shop and talk about some of the technical aspects of this 911.
Well, Mark, Tri Industries has brought us a Bavarian masterpiece. This is the Carrera T, also known as the Carrera Tough model.
Oh, yeah, that's what the T stands for?
Yeah.
And it's the 991.2, so it's the refresh and the last generation 911, because now we're on to the 992 in 2020.
Yes, so if you're watching this in 2019, this is already a old car.
It's old news. Why are we even here?
Well, this is our preface video to our GT3 video, which is a 991.2 GT3 we're doing later
Same
this year.
generation, just the GT3 version.
So we're not going to go in the crazy deep dives we normally do on the suspension architecture, so I'm going to give you kind of the highlights of what they changed for 2017. So this Carrera T is a mix of Carrera S suspension with the regular Carrera engine. What they did for 2017 is they lowered the whole lineup by 10 millimeters.
Okay.
They revised the suspension, so the tuning has changed. They added the availability of rear steer just for the Carrera S and the Carrera T. They increased the brakes. They revised PSM, which is a Porsche stability management control, which is paired with Sport Chrono, which is another option. Everything on a Porsche is an option.
Right, yeah. That's why you always see them crazy priced.
Yes, and then the adaptive sway bars, which is basically, I think Porsche calls it PDCC, which is their way to mitigate roll actively, so you're not stuck with a very stiff ride, has also been revised.
Most of this is revision of suspension, calibration of all the electronic systems, and then adding in more electronics and electronic controls like the rear steering into pretty much all the models. Is that right or no?
Yeah, it's all because, and we're about to get there, the highlight of this is they went away from naturally aspirated motors. The current generation of 911s moving forward will all have forced induction. So let's head to the back. So we've made it to the back of this particular 911, and what do you see, Mark?
I see an amazing amount of... I was so impressed when I put this in the air. I gotta be real, because you get tired of seeing the same thing over and over again, and this is not. The entire underbelly of this car is flat because with the engine's in the back, so you don't have an exhaust tunnel, you don't have differentials you have to worry about. So aerodynamically, this is ultra impressive. And you get to the rear suspension, you know, the front looks pretty normal. It's a strut front suspension with an aluminum carrier, aluminum hubs, all of that with some big ass brakes, which they uprated for all the new cars. But the back is where it's at. All aluminum subframe carrier. You have 2 lower control arms, 2 upper, it's a multi-link, and then you have your tow control system or your rear wheel steering module, and they're separated for each corner. Coilover shocks, front and rear, electronically controlled, as you talked about. This does not have an active sway bar in the back, but everything else looks pretty badass. And then you get to things like the engine, the composite oil pan. You actually see the oil feed lines going directly from the pan into the turbo or the turbo area, and everything is so exposed I couldn't believe it. The turbo's literally right here. So I couldn't imagine driving, like if you wanted to make a mistake and drive this in winter in the Midwest and literally destroy this thing, that would be the best way to do it. But that's what I'm seeing. So what do you have for me?
So this is a all new for 2017 Carrera S motor. Well, actually in this case it's a Carrera engine. It's a 3-liter twin turbo engine. So the difference between the Carrera and the Carrera S are the size of the turbochargers and the amount of boost available. Basically, the Carrera S makes 420 odd horsepower because of the larger turbos.
And what does this make?
370-ish.
Okay. And these turbos are like pocket size. They're so tiny, which makes sense when you drive it. I would say nobody would guess that it's turbocharged.
There is a ton of things they did to this 3-liter, but before we touch on that, let's talk about the transmission.
Okay.
So for the 991.2 generation, they updated both the PDK and the 7-speed manual. You can get both with a Carrera T. Thankfully, this is the manual. It's a 7-speed. They added a new twin disc clutch. They changed the gear ratios for the 7-speed, and they changed basically the way the shift linkage feels.
Okay.
For the PDK, they added a dual mass flywheel. One of the main benefits to this engine, as we brought up, is there's almost zero turbo lag. They did this by preloading the turbos at basically at all times when you're driving it hard.
Okay.
They close off the bypass valve so that it's always almost spooled. That's why it feels so naturally aspirated.
And the fact that they're so small, I mean, you literally probably can get boost at idle.
Yeah.
Or pretty damn close.
It makes peak torque from 1,700 to 5,500 RPM.
Okay.
Again, why it feels naturally aspirated.
So as we brought up before, there's a lot more electronic controls, like the fact that they've reduced pumping losses or increased efficiency by literally turning off the water pump when coolant temperature's low enough where it doesn't need to be run, and it will kill the AC compressor as well. It will disconnect that.
Yeah, this was all done in the sake of efficiency, right? The byproduct of basically required government fuel economy standards is they had to innovate. And by doing that, they added more horsepower. There's 20 more horsepower across the lineup for the Carrera and the Carrera S. They had to change all the internals because of the turbos. The cylinder walls and the crank are plasma coated. They had to do a whole new fuel injection system for this car, and they stole the intake manifold from the GT2.
Okay. Which has like an expansion area or something in the manifold itself. To
increase airflow efficiency and to reduce heat.
Okay.
There was a lot of innovation done in this engine, and it's largely carried over now into the new 992 cars.
Yeah, this just wasn't for this last generation. They kind of stuffed it in this car to make sure it was ready for the new generation car as well.
Yes. The last thing to bring up is the actual front and rear fascias of this car. They were, as you brought up earlier, changed for the 99 1.2 generation. They opened up a bunch of ducting for this turbocharged engine. So 911s have an active rear wing, which you and I joke is pretty corny,
yeah.
But in this car's case, when it opens, it's opening not only for increased downforce, but it's opening so there are these ram air ducts in the rear that are feeding the engine.
So it's a dual purpose design to create some downforce, stability, and feed more air in.
Yeah.
And I think if you want more, we're gonna go even crazier when we get into the 991.2 GT3, which has got a lot of fun stuff. But let's get this thing out on the road and get out of the shop. Porsche 911T, it's got a cool feature. Oh, that's a nice quirk. Oh, I don't even have to restart it. It restarts itself when you stall it. Is this car designed for people that don't know how to drive, Jack?
It's designed by German engineers who understand perfection.
Yeah, I guess so. There's a lot of that in this car that you're gonna basically wet yourself over. So let's hear it. What's so good about it, Jack?
So this car, after spending 3 days in it, is better than my C7 Grand Sport in every conceivable metric other than engine soundtrack, which is subjective, and on-track performance. This car to me is near perfect. It's my favorite car we've driven on this channel from a engineering / emotional compromise, right? I mean, yes, it is not the riot that the Red Eye was, but to me, this is the car I want to take home and buy.
Okay, so how much is this thing?
$105,000.
Okay.
Without options.
So why would you buy this for $105,000? What does it do that is so remarkable?
The engineer part of my body, the part of me that's a mechanical engineer, it's what my degree's in, is straight up pitching a tent whenever I drive this car because it's a byproduct of focused engineering. They did not cut corners, at least when I drive this car, unlike my Chevy where like parts of this came off a Malibu, parts of this came off X, Y, and Z, or the transmission feels like it's out of a boat. This car, everything about it is near perfect. The steering's great. It has one of the best driving positions of any car I've been in. You have great sight lines. The rake isn't crazy. The pedal box is basically perfect. With my 13 size feet, I have no problem heel towing. And the transmission, as I brought up earlier, feels like it's from a different century when compared to the 7-speed Tremec that's in my Grand Sport.
Well, it's different. So let's talk about that. People will complain that Porsche has gone to electric power steering, which there's a whole host of reasons for, but I have to say this is really one of the best electric power steering units you're ever going to find. The manual trans has a mechanical feel to it, like you said, and if you're going to do a manual transmission in this day and age, it better be good, because if you're just putting it in there just to put it in there, and there's so many cars that do it, like, oh, look, we put the money into a manual trans, and people don't buy it. Well, when you do a good job like this, it makes a world of difference. The pedal box, all the driver inputs, that's where I can understand why people are so addicted to these cars. But, okay, mechanically, yes, the engineering, the fact that they didn't cost cut their way to building this car, because it had to be at $105,000, and it also had to be that car that's like over $200,000 for the GT3 RS. So you're building a solid platform that most manufacturers don't have the flexibility to do.
Yeah.
Never guess that there was turbochargers on Aero turbocharger. It sounds like classic Porsche stuff when you wind it out, and that's what makes these cars so enjoyable. The engine note. Just listen to it. I'm not even going to talk. Just listen to it.
And I think that's the other thing I love about this car, is that because it's not ungodly fast, right? This Carrera T has the base Carrera 3-liter turbocharged engine with a lower amount of boost than the Carrera S. And the way this car is geared, and the fact that the limits of both the tires and the suspension are lower, you can actually enjoy it on this kind of B road. That's why it's such a great balance for me. Yeah, the brakes aren't as good as my Grand Sports, really, at the end of the day, because they're not the 6-piston monsters. But I think because of that, I like this car so much, but I know it does not appeal to you on the same emotional level that it appeals to me.
I think objectively, I understand why people are married to the 911 brand. I understand why, if you're a Porsche person, and you've always bought Porsches and you've always owned 911s, I get why. And it's probably because you've come from other cars that have given you drama or problems.
No.
And I get it. Like, I really do get it, because this car is perfection as a street car. It does everything that you want it to do. It has great sight lines. It rides good. It's pretty quiet. It's refined, and you still have a good mechanical feel. But my problem with this, and the reason why I wouldn't spend $105,000 on this, it's like a chalkboard. It's like a perfectly clean chalkboard. It has a sterile feeling to it. It doesn't have that much emotion to it. Specifically, if you're somebody that's gotten out of a GT3, when you get out of a GT3 and come into a regular 911, you're like, what? Why would I even consider that? And I think that is where this car does not work for me. I would much rather buy something like an LC500 that has character. It's got the V8. It has the styling. You will look back at it, at least today, maybe not in 10 years, but you'll look back at it and think, okay, that is something special. A 911 it's been the same, it looks the same forever, and it's going to look the same in 20 years. They just don't go outside of that box.
But because it's so predictable, it's like the car you marry, right? You know every single day when you go out to your garage, it's going to be as good as it could possibly be. It probably won't break down.
Hopefully, yeah. Unless you get a lemon.
It's going to be, very consistent, right? There's not a single real fault to this car. Yes, the emotional highs aren't going to be as high as the Hellcat or, in some ways, the LC, but it's always going to be good.
I mean, if you just want that always going to be good car that you can count on, and you have one sports car in your garage, I understand why you would buy this. But I would much rather have, honestly, a red eye. And I know that's crazy, because that thing, it's a Dodge, but at least you feel something. You have this sound, you have the experience, and it's less money. The LC is the same way. It has the look, it has the feel that it's something special for this generation. And I guess that's just the type of person you're going to be. Where are you at your point in your life? What do you value? And this does everything. It just is not high on that drama level.
Bring up what you brought up earlier to me off camera, where you think the LC is a product of its generation, where this is just an evolution.
Yeah. Well, you take this car and you take an LC in 20 years. you're going to be looking at the LC and like, okay, we know there's not going to be something else like that. You're not going to have a naturally aspirated V8 anymore if all the emission stuff continues and regulations. It's going to be a very special car in a way like the old NSX was. It was a byproduct of that generation. They were kind of pushing the boundaries of style and all that. Yes, it's not perfect, but it's a very special car for the here and now, where in 20 years, you're going to look back, oh, this was a 991.2 911. Oh, yeah, that was a good car at the time. But now I have the 9920.6 911, and look at all the stuff that they changed. It's just, these are very predictable, very consistent type sports cars where, you know, if you're looking for a little bit more, this is not it.
I think when you buy this car, if you won this car from Tri Industries, you could own this Carrera T, and in 10 years, yes, the new one might be better, but everything about it will age well.
No, you're right. And I think that's a big factor to the argument that I just said. The LC might be weird and like somebody's like, oh God, that thing looks so 2019. Whereas the 911 is like, it's very timeless. It's very timeless, and you're always gonna look back and know that's a 911. It was never flashy. It was never trying too hard. They just knew how to build it, and that's why people love these.
So with all of that being said, let's get into the final thoughts, Mark.
Sounds good. Final thoughts on the 911T. And as we've talked about multiple times in this video, it feels like Porsche has evolved this car over 500 years. They've taken their time. They've mastered the rear engine formula. They've created a reliable package now. You get a manual transmission that doesn't feel like they just pulled it out of a scrap bin. The suspension tuning doesn't feel like it was done by junior engineers from their truck division. Everything works so well, and that's why people love this thing. It is such a joy to drive in an era when sports cars are kind of disappearing or getting overly complicated. The 911T is still somewhat affordable, attainable to most people, and that's what makes it great. The not so great is, well, to me, I get out in a parking lot, every Porsche looks the same. I mean, it's just, you know what you're getting, but there's just not a lot of flair there. And in terms of interior space, while it is super simple, it's just, to me, it doesn't add up to a $100,000 plus price tag. And that's my own personal issue with it, but everything else around it is remarkable. I totally get it. And I think you're gonna get it too if you ever get a chance to drive this or win this car. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.